This is the Plagmanrules Podcast. Everybody, welcome back. It's Monday, August 7th, and we're going to take a look at the weekend box office report, at least by the estimates we have this morning. There's also a review I want to do for The Big Sick. We'll take a look at that one here in a little bit. But first, let's start with the weekend box office. Okay, so I kind of just looked up a few of the headlines here this morning, and the big headline everybody's using here for the weekend box office is The Dark Tower has become the lowest opening for a 2017 summer movie that's taken the #1 spot at the box office. And you know what? The movie, I haven't seen it or anything, but I was not really interested in seeing it. It opened to 19.5 million here its opening weekend. For me, that number, yeah, I think it is a bit of a disappointment to the studio. I mean, 15 million would have been a catastrophe, but just a little under 20 million here. You're still in the ballpark figure to where if the movie does okay for the rest of its domestic run here, and its overseas box office helps it a little bit, which right now it hasn't opened everywhere yet, but its overseas box office is not really off to a terrific start either. It's only at 27.5 million once you factor in the foreign numbers, at least from the ones that have been reported so far. So to that degree, it had a $60 million production budget. They were kind of hoping for the start of a franchise here. This isn't the best news for any of the executives over at Sony who produced this one. And yeah, I think the thing is with The Dark Tower is it's a very popular book series by Stephen King, and there's been so much talk through all the years here of there being a adaptation. And we've had like Ron Howard, we've had J.J. Abrams has expressed interest, I believe. There's probably another dozen or so writers and directors, studio executives who have been plotting for probably, it's close to 2 decades now, to get some version of this movie and this book series to the big screen. And evidently, this was not what the audience wanted. Now, Matthew McConaughey was one of the big stars of the movie. Now, Idris Elba was also one of the top billed stars there. Now, I know there's a lot of people in the movie circle that know all the stars and everything, and Idris Elba is a name that they know, but he's not exactly a household name. He's not one that's gonna open to 25 million automatically. So there is a certain degree of people that are saying, well, it should have opened better just because of those two names. Well, really the big name they were trying to sell here was Matthew McConaughey, and less so in Idris Elba. Even though he is a very gifted and talented actor and everything, he's just not one that's going to sell tickets big time. You know, he's not a big draw for your average everyday moviegoer. So also here, we'll take a look at a couple other ones here. Dunkirk held really well this weekend. It actually got a big theater boost. It's now in over 4,000 theaters for the first time of its release, and has now climbed to about 133.5 million here in the States after a 17.6 million third weekend here at the box office. And as I kind of suspected here a few weeks ago, that Dunkirk was going to do fine here in the States, but its foreign box office I thought would be significantly higher, and that's pretty much how it's going right now. Its worldwide total is now at about very close to 315 million, and just out of the US it's now climbed over 180 million, so that's a really good success. And of course, as we kind of mentioned here, the movie, since it is set in France and it's World War II without the American involvement and everything, it wasn't automatically going to apply to every US audience member who could directly relate to it. But still, at a $100 million budget, yeah, this thing is continuing to rake in some really solid dough for Warner Brothers. Kind of a surprise for me was third place, the Emoji Movie. I thought this movie was going to drop like a sandbag as far as its box office total. Somehow this movie, even after being totally panned by critics, even though a lot of the audience really just did not care for it, and even I've heard some kids got really bored with it, this movie still held at just under a 50% drop for 12.3 million its second weekend. Now, the movie cost them about 50 million. It's just about broken even here in the States just with that. After the advertising and everything, this movie has probably still got another 25 or 30 million to go before it does totally break even, and that's just by the state standards here. But worldwide, it is up to about 62 million now. So actually, once you factor in the worldwide totals and everything, it's probably closer to like another 10 or 15 million before it does break even. But if this second weekend of the box office tells us anything, yeah, it's going to happen. And the movie is going to be a little bit of a profit here for Sony, even though we have had reports here in the last few weeks about them losing all this money and all that through this year and through last year. Girls Trip is continuing its very impressive run here at the box office. And yes, this is kind of this year's equivalent of Bad Moms. Fell another 41%, 11.4 million in fourth place this weekend. And the movie should easily cross 100 million here by next weekend. And that's just worldwide total. Here in the States, it'll definitely top 100 million as well. Now we'll get into a couple of the other releases that were new this weekend, or actually we had one that was new and one that is expanding here. We'll actually cover the one that's expanding first, Detroit. Boy, I don't know. I did, as I kind of plug here, on movieblogger.com, I have a weekend box office predictions I put up on Thursdays. I put Detroit, I think I put it at like 15 million. I thought the movie was going to take off. The ads have been really good for this. The critical reviews have been spectacular. Everybody's talking about this movie, saying go see it. And it expanded into 3,000 theaters, a little over 3,000 theaters, and only earned about 7.2 million for 8th place. That is, I mean, if I'm Annapurna right now, I am very disappointed in that number. Because, number one, my expectations, maybe they were a little too high. I mean, the tracking on this was maybe saying 11 or 12 million once it expanded into its wide release its first weekend. So even on that regard, yes, this is a big letdown for them. But they have really put a lot of heart and soul into this movie's advertising and getting everybody to go out and see it. I haven't got a chance to see it yet, but I suspect that it's probably going to be on a lot of people's lists of the best films of the year. So that's a really disappointing number, in my regards especially, and even for tracking, yeah, this is not what they wanted. So I don't know. It kind of falls into this category I've been talking about here lately, to where you have movies like War for the Planet of the Apes, which is the best in that franchise, maybe the best or even better than the original film from 1968. That one has been a big disappointment, at least in a lot of people's eyes here in the States, which is too bad because I thought that movie deserves a lot more than what it's getting. And then you had something like Captain Underpants from earlier in the summer. That one was kind of a hidden gem of a movie, and that one, again, has just not gotten what it's deserved here, at least at the US box office. So this one kind of falls into that category there, to where some of the critically acclaimed movies, like we did have Baby Driver earlier this year, that one is actually getting pretty close to crossing 100 million here in the States. Wonder Woman, which is probably going to cross 400 million here in the States by the end of the week. It might even cross by tomorrow or Wednesday. You know, you have movies like that have done very well at the box office, and they have also gotten the critical acclaim. Spider-Man Homecoming is another example of that too. But for every one of those, there's one that's really disappointed. So this one, Detroit, we're going to have to add to the disappointed pile. Now, here's one. This one perplexes me, people. I don't know. I don't get this. Kidnap. This is the new movie from Halle Berry, which I gotta tell you, I saw zero advertisements for this movie. I didn't see a poster. I didn't see a trailer. I saw no TV ads. I saw nothing for this movie. Absolutely nothing. No promotional material for this whatsoever. A lot of sites actually had it opening this coming weekend, not this past weekend. And it was only in about 2,300 theaters. So how that movie got into 5th place with 10 million, it was actually 10.2 million, that one, I have no idea where that came from. And it didn't have a lot of critical success to it either. Some critics liked it, others hated it. So I don't get it. I don't get what fueled that one to be such a knockout hit, because they were projecting, at least by the tracking and everything, a $4 million opening for this movie, and it more than doubled that. It get like 2.5 times that, and there you go. That's your opening weekend numbers. Where the fuck did this number come from? 10.2. I don't even know if I believe it. It's just so out of left field. I don't get it. Anyways, so that one, I guess Halle Berry still has her star power to her, even though she couldn't help the Cloud Atlas movie a couple of years ago, even though she's had some other bombs recently. I guess I totally missed the boat on that one. Okay, and one other thing we'll mention here, we have the limited release this weekend of Wind River. This is actually the directorial debut of Taylor Sheridan, who's the screenwriter who was actually just Oscar nominated for Hell or High Water. And this one, I've been seeing the ads for it. It played at the Sundance Film Festival back in January. It's, again, a very well-received movie, and it got a great weekend of the box office here in limited release. Only 4 theaters played it, and it got about $164,000 here this weekend for a per-theater average of over $41,000. $1,000. That is a very great number for this, and the trailers, everything has been getting me really pumped to see this. Hopefully it's in a bigger release here in the next couple weeks. This is one I'm dying to see. So I'm very glad that that one got the biggest per theater average of the weekend. Okay, so the next thing we'll get to here is a review. We're going to review The Big Sick. This movie's been out for a little while here, but I got a chance to see it a couple weeks ago. Here's my review for The Big Sick. You know, sometimes you go to the movies with this preconceived notion of what the film is going to be, and that preconception leads to either a discovery of a film that really bends those thoughts into either a really well done film that you appreciate, or it's a disaster that will leave you wondering what was going on. Luckily, for the sake of The Big Sick, it's the former. I thought going in this would be your standard rom-com with a lead actor from the Middle East falling in love with a white gal from the city. Then one of them gets lovesick or something. Now, given that I hadn't seen any of the trailers and that the TV ads are pretty brief, I didn't get that story, but I did. Kind of. So the movie is somewhat based around true events, as its lead character, Kumail, played by Kumail Nanjiani, so you get the joke there, is a stand-up comedian in Chicago who is making ends meet with various gigs and being an Uber driver, but hopes one day to break big in the comedy world. But he also loves his Pakistani family, whose culture demands an arranged marriage for him. That especially comes into conflict after Kumail meets Emily, a psychology student who's based on real-life Emily V. Gordon, and the two form a somewhat haphazard relationship. However, as Emily comes under illness that could threaten her way of life, Kumail must come to the rescue and must juggle his personal life, getting to know Emily's parents, and trying to keep his family from knowing the truth. And as far as praising the movie, all of that has to start and end with the star and co-writer on this movie, who is Kumail Nanjiani, whose name I was not familiar with before seeing the film, but now has come onto my radar in a big way. His performance is very well-rounded, with both fantastic comedic timing and a real effort at making the situation dramatic when it needs to be, and not falling into melodrama. There's a whole bunch of one-liners that are terrific, and among them are some of the funniest 9/11 jokes I've heard in a while that aren't exactly the most despicable thing you'll ever hear. I know there are many people who are still easily offended or upsetted by these jokes, but trust me, with the context given in the film and the way they're delivered, you'll be laughing. Zoe Kazan also does a really nice job as Emily, even with the fact that nearly half of her screen time is when she's in a hospital bed. But the two who steal the show are Holly Hunter and Ray Romano as Emily's parents. I could sum it up in this way. If we saw a spin-off movie with just these two characters, I think it could make for a movie that's just as good as this one was. They are perfectly paired together. Their dynamic and side stories, while they do add up to the movie's runtime, are as intriguing as the main storyline. And when their final scene came up and I realized it was going to be their final scene, I kind of had this feeling of, no, I want more. It isn't very often when those type of characters get as dynamic and as fascinating, especially when they're introduced probably about halfway through the film. As I mentioned, the comedy really works here, but what really makes a romantic comedy click is, do we care about the couple? In short, yes. Both Kumail and Zoe have chemistry right off the bat, and the two are nicely paired here, and it's ultimately a romantic comedy that isn't afraid to back down from the romance part of being a romantic comedy. It's got all the comedy elements, sure, but if we don't feel anything for the characters or the love story, then it can make for a movie that can either suck entirely or is close, but just not quite there. The Big Sick walks that line practically perfect. Really about the only thing I have to complain about here was it could have been shorter, and it drags a couple of times. While I was following the story all the way through, I think an hour and 45-minute runtime probably would have fit the film a little better, especially when we get to the last 20 minutes or so. There's a few moments where the movie just doesn't know where it wants to end or how to end. So yeah, that could have shaved off about 10 or so minutes there, but there's a couple of moments right before Emily is hospitalized that tend to drag slightly. I mean, not bad, but again, this is something that's kind of a pace issue that could have been more settled. But seriously, I can't think of much else that I would have changed about this. If you're gonna see one romantic comedy this summer, or hell, maybe even this year, this is probably your best bet. Kumail Nanjiani is now a name I'll know and I'll follow, and I can easily see him being the breakout comedy star of the summer. And I'd even argue when we get closer to awards time that if the supporting actor and actress categories start to look really dry, seriously consider Holly Hunter and Ray Romano. They are terrific, and I can easily see Kumail being a Best Actor Comedy or Musical nomination at the Golden Globes, and he's very deserving of that. The Big Sick has a lot of jokes that are aimed at adults, but it's hard to see anyone not sitting down and enjoying themselves with the movie. This is one illness you won't want to get away from. My rating is a 9 out of 10. Alright guys, well, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Plagmanrules Podcast. Just a couple of things to leave you off on before we go. If you have any ideas or discussion points you'd like brought up on the Plagmanrules Podcast, you can leave a comment here on YouTube. Otherwise, I do have a separate Gmail account set up, and that is plagmanrulespodcast@gmail.com. That's PLAGMANRULES podcast@gmail.com. Again, if there is a comment, something you like, something you don't like about the show, you can leave it there at that Gmail account, or here on YouTube, or again, any discussion points, something that I missed in the movie news, or something you really would like me to talk about for a little bit, you can leave, again, a comment here on YouTube, or leave an email at that Gmail address. Alright, well that's going to do it for today. We'll keep an eye on the movie news this week, and be back with you on Friday talking about what else is going on this week in movie news. So until then, this has been the Plagmanrules Podcast.